Michael didn't even look up from the purchase order spreadsheet when he said it. "You are suspended until you apologize to your sister, Emily." No tension, no warning. Just a sentence dropped into the middle of a morning staff meeting in a cramped conference room overlooking the quiet streets of Salem, Oregon. A room I'd kept functioning through budget freezes, leaking vents, and staff shortages for nearly 5 years. A pen froze midair. Someone tucked their coffee cup closer, as if distancing themselves from whatever fallout might land. My sister, Rachel, tilted her head in that practiced, innocent but not really way she'd mastered since we were teenagers. Her lower lip pushed out just enough to look offended, but the tiny smile she tried to hide told the truth. I stood near the projector screen, finger on the remote, watching the slide stop mid-transition. No one clarified. No one asked what happened. No one asked why. I didn't argue. I didn't ask for context. I didn't even sigh. I just said, "All right." If my father had known what that word meant, what it would open and what it would shut, he might have swallowed the demand instead. I grew up in a home where silence was sold as peace, where not causing trouble was treated like a personality trait. But silence was never peace. It was placement. Rachel learned the rules before I even knew there were any. She cried one time during a fifth-grade science fair because a classmate bumped her display, and Dad rushed in like she'd been injured. She left the school gym with a brand new replacement board, an ice cream cone, and a ride home. I finished my project alone that afternoon because the teacher assumed I could handle myself. Handling myself became the family expectation long before anyone asked if I wanted that role. I remember the day my college acceptance letter arrived, a thick envelope with my name centered neatly on the front. I opened it on the kitchen counter, heart pounding, and for a few seconds, everything felt new, like possibility had weight. Dad skimmed the first line, nodded once, and set it beside a pile of coupons like it was a bill reminder he'll deal with later. He didn't even flip the page. 10 minutes later, Rachel came home wearing an engagement ring from a boyfriend she'd known for 7 months. The house erupted. Congratulations, calls to relatives, champagne pulled from the back of the fridge. My letter disappeared under party napkins before anyone asked what school it was from. That was when I learned that in my family, accomplishment mattered less than spectacle. After Mom passed, everything sharpened. She'd been the buffer, the one who noticed when I was tired, when I was overwhelmed, when I'd been carrying too much alone. She was the softness built into the structure. When we lost her, the house lost balance, and every blind spot my father had nurtured grew roots. Rachel didn't change. She just had less resistance. The pattern followed us into the family business, only now it had a budget attached. I built the operations department from 3 desks shoved beside an old storage room to a full floor with project managers, analysts, and staff who trusted me. I knew every system, every deadline, every number behind every promise. I didn't brag. I didn't have to. Rachel mastered the other side, the side built on smiles, handshakes, compliments, timelines she made up without asking anyone who'd do the work. She'd promise 4-week deliverables when the back end alone needed 12. She'd underbid projects without consulting accounting, then tell Dad the team could adjust. And every time he'd back her. "She knows clients," he'd say. "You'll figure it out. You always do." So we did. My team worked late under the blue glow of screens. I worked later, smoothing over bad estimates, rewriting schedules, pulling resources Rachel had forgotten were already assigned elsewhere. I carried the consequences quietly, because that was the role I'd been raised to fill. I didn't argue. I documented. Documentation became its own language. Risk logs, timeline revisions, budget notes, all the evidence no one bothered to read, but I kept anyway. The last project before the suspension was the one that finally cut through the denial I'd lived inside for years. Rachel made another impossible promise. 6 weeks for an overhaul that required double that time. Dad approved it before the email even reached my inbox. When I pointed out the numbers didn't add up, he looked at me with the same patient, dismissive expression he used when I was 9 and asked why Rachel always got the bigger slice of cake. "Just do your best," he said. "Don't make this a thing." Standing in the hallway outside that meeting room, something inside me settled. Quiet, sharp, undeniable. I'd spent a lifetime being reasonable for people who never intended to see me at all. That morning, after Dad announced my suspension, I walked out of the conference room and felt the air shift around me. People stepped aside, not out of respect, but out of discomfort. Like standing too close to me meant acknowledging a conflict they didn't want to be associated with. No one said my name. No one met my gaze. When I reached my floor, A printed memo was taped beside the elevators. A new project hierarchy. A new chart. Rachel's name sat neatly at the top of the division I had built from scratch. My name was missing entirely. Not an oversight. A rewrite. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from one of my analysts. Are you okay? Another. Do we still follow your timeline? Another. They're saying a lot upstairs. I turned my phone face down on my desk and let the vibrations hum against the wood. Dad called a few minutes later. He didn't ask how I felt. He didn't ask what happened. He asked if I understood the optics. His voice carried the same tone he used when I was 12, explaining why Rachel got the last slice of pie. Just let it go, he said. Family comes first. Family. The word felt strangely hollow in his mouth. When I hung up, Rachel was already standing in my doorway. She didn't knock. She leaned against the frame like she owned the space because Dad made sure she could. You can fix this, she said softly, pretending it was kindness. Just apologize. She brushed imaginary lint from her blazer, checked her reflection in my dark computer screen, and smiled at herself, confident, certain of her victory. I watched that smile the same way I'd watched it all my life. A curve that meant she didn't believe in consequences. Not for her. Not ever. I didn't answer. Something inside me shifted. Not anger. Not fear. Something quieter. Like a door clicking shut so gently no one else heard it. I picked up my portfolio, closed my laptop, and stood. Rachel blinked. That's it? I nodded once. All right. And that was the moment everything began to change. I didn't look directly at her. I didn't give her the scene she was waiting for, the outrage she could twist into a performance. Instead, I felt that quiet shift move through me again, steadier this time, like a lock turning in a door I hadn't realized I'd been holding open for years. Rachel watched me, expecting a fight, a raised voice, a plea, anything she could stand on. I picked up my portfolio, slid my laptop under my arm, and walked past her without a word. The hallway outside my office felt colder than it should have, the hum of the fluorescent lights louder than usual. People glanced up from their desks, then immediately back down at their screens, pretending they hadn't seen a thing. I reached my office, closed the door, and listened to the latch click into place. The sound was small, almost polite, but it drew a line in my life so clean it might as well have been carved in glass. The room looked different now, like I was seeing it from outside myself for the first time. The glass walls, the framed certificates, the plants I'd kept alive between back-to-back deadlines, the soft whir of the air conditioner and the distant clatter of keyboards down the hall. All of it suddenly looked temporary, borrowed. I set my laptop on the desk, slipped the hair tie from my wrist, and pulled my hair back, anchoring myself with a movement so familiar it felt like muscle memory from another lifetime. Then I opened the top drawer and began. The first thing I took out were the documents no one else ever touched. Project scopes I'd written from scratch, risk assessments I'd adjusted at midnight, notes from meetings where I'd sat quietly in the corner while decisions were made in my name, invoices, payment records, budget breakdowns, timelines I'd scribbled across notepads in my kitchen with a mug of coffee growing cold beside me. I laid each folder out across the desk in a neat row, checking dates, matching signatures, moving with the same calm precision I used when fixing a broken workflow. No rush, no panic, just truth. I took my framed degrees off the wall one by one, wrapped them in tissue paper I kept in the bottom drawer, and stacked them gently in a box. Every plaque followed. Recognitions, awards, the small acknowledgments the company had been willing to put in writing even when my father hadn't. The walls, once crowded with proof of my effort, went blank, colder, preparing themselves for whoever would stand there next, pretending to know what this job required. My laptop chimed, then chimed again. Messages slid into the corner of the screen, from my team, from colleagues on other floors, from people who had been in the conference room and were now pretending they hadn't understood what they saw. Are you okay? Do we still follow your last schedule? They're saying this is temporary. Is that true? I turned the laptop face down on the desk. The silence that followed was cleaner. I opened a new document, not to argue, not to explain, but to end something. A resignation letter. Simple, precise, no emotional flourishes, no accusations, no history. Just formal language closing a role I'd already stepped out of in my mind. When I finished, I printed it and set it aside. Then came the part no one had asked for, but everyone needed. I opened the shared drive and began to gather everything Rachel had spent years pretending didn't exist. Project histories, resource allocations, contract notes, email threads where she'd agreed to timelines without checking a single technical detail, revised budgets, a trail of numbers and words, all of it already there, untouched, waiting. I didn't edit the tone. I didn't highlight or add side comments. I didn't embellish. I only collected what was already true. 2 hours passed without my noticing, the way a long exhale feels when you realize you've been holding your breath for too long. By the time I finished compiling, what sat on the screen wasn't an argument, it was a mirror. My fingers hovered over the send button, not out of doubt, but out of discipline. Timing mattered. A quiet plan doesn't yell, it lands. I addressed the email to the board, to the department heads, and to the primary stakeholders on the projects Rachel had promised her way through. Subject line: project documentation and status overview. No urgency, no exclamation marks, just clarity. Then I clicked send. My phone lit up less than a minute later. First from the company's lawyer, then from a board member I'd met twice, then from an unfamiliar number I recognized as a client's area code. I let each call go to voicemail. I moved slowly around the office, picking up the pieces of my presents. My favorite pen, a notebook with half-filled pages, the mug my team had given me last winter with a joke printed on the side. The only thing I left behind was a small prototype from a project we once saved over a weekend. 40 hours in 2 days, fueled by bad takeout and a rare moment of shared purpose. The model tilted slightly, and I reached out to straighten it, wiping a bit of dust from the edge. It belonged to the team, to that moment, more than it ever belonged to me. So I left it. The knock didn't come. The door just opened. Rachel stepped in without waiting, a little breathless, eyes sharp and wild in a way I hadn't seen before. "What did you do?" she asked, the words hitting the glass and bouncing faintly back. Her gaze darted around the room. Empty walls, open boxes, cleared surfaces. "You can't leave," she said, stepping further inside, like crossing a line she never imagined existed. "Dad won't allow it. You're overreacting. You're making a mistake." I slid my laptop into its sleeve. "No," I said. "I'm correcting one." Her mouth opened, ready to protest, to spin a story that kept her at the center as the injured party. But she stopped when she saw my desk, completely cleared. The surface that had held my hours, my effort, my exhaustion, now empty. For the first time in a long time, Rachel didn't seem to know where to stand. I walked past her without asking permission. The hallway smelt faintly of copier toner and burnt coffee, the smell that had followed me for years. Every step felt measured, grounded, not like escape, but like alignment. By the time I reached the elevator, my phone buzzed with a new notification. A reply from a recruiter I'd once turned down out of loyalty to family. The message was short, direct. "Position still open. Can you talk this week?" I tapped out a response. "Yes." On my way out of the building, Dad's name flashed across my screen again. I let it ring. The voicemail that followed was tight with urgency. "Emily, we need to talk. Don't do anything rash. We can fix this." But nothing about what I'd done was rash. It was 4 years of documentation and one very quiet decision. That evening, as the light slanted across the small living room in my rental on the edge of Salem, the house felt different too. Not bigger, not brighter, just mine. I set the portfolio on the dining table, opened it, and arranged the documents into careful stacks. Contracts in one, payments in another, timelines in a third. At the center, the printed resignation letter waiting for ink. I sat down, took a breath that reached the bottom of my lungs, and signed my name with a steady hand. The motion felt less like surrender and more like reclaiming something I hadn't realized I'd been giving away. I slid everything back into the portfolio, closed it gently, and let my fingers rest along the seam for a moment, recognizing the weight of what it held. The silence in the room wasn't oppressive for once. It wasn't full of unsaid arguments or swallowed feelings. It was just stillness, clean. The next morning, I woke without the tight knot in my chest I'd grown used to calling normal. I dressed without thinking about impressions. No blazer chosen to signal authority, no shoes picked for whether they'd be quiet on office tile, just clothes that felt like me. On the drive back to the office, the streets of Salem looked almost unfamiliar. Same storefronts, same trees, same slow pedestrians at crosswalks. But it felt like I was passing through a life I no longer owed anything to. The building's lobby was louder than usual when I walked in, conversation dropping to a murmur as I passed. People pretended to look at notices on the wall, at their phones, at the floor. Someone pressed the elevator button, then stepped away when they saw me, as if proximity itself were risky now. On the executive floor, Dad's assistant stood near the doorway, clutching a folder against her chest like a shield. "He wants to see you," she said, voice thin at the edges. But the look in her eyes told me this meeting was coming whether I agreed to it or not. I didn't answer her. I already knew where he was waiting. The conference room door was open. Dad stood at the far end of the table, shoulders squared but sagging just slightly, eyes red-rimmed like he'd spent the night trying to contain something that had moved beyond containment. The company lawyer sat on one side, laptop open, expression tight. A paralegal tapped quietly in the corner, recording every word. Rachel stood near the window, arms crossed, jaw clenched, like she'd been holding the same breath since my email went out. No one spoke until I took my seat. Dad tried first. "We can work this out," he said, voice reaching for authority and landing on strain instead. "Let's be rational." I set the portfolio on the table. The soft sound of it hitting the surface seemed louder than it should have been. "I'm here to finalize my resignation," I said evenly. The lawyer inhaled sharply. Rachel blinked, the first crack in her performance. Dad's jaw tightened. "You don't need to do this." I opened the portfolio and placed the resignation letter on the table, sliding it forward like a final move in a game they hadn't realized they'd already lost. Suspension without documented cause triggers severance terms. Section 12 covers immediate vesting. The lawyer's eyes flicked to my face, then to the document. He had already read my contract. He nodded once. Dad blinked slowly, as if finally remembering he'd signed those terms himself 4 years ago. Rachel stepped forward, voice sharp. "This is ridiculous. You're blowing everything out of proportion. All you had to do was apologize." I slid a second folder across the table. "That's project documentation from the last 3 years. Timelines, resource allocations, contracts, payment schedules, email confirmations." The lawyer hesitated, then opened it. His face drained as he flipped through page after page. "This is extensive," he murmured. Rachel leaned over his shoulder and her eyes widened as she recognized her own words, her own promises, her own signed approvals. "You can't send this to clients. They'll think I already did." "Say something," she demanded, but his eyes were fixed on the stack of paper in front of him, not on her, not on me, but on the reflection of a pattern he'd spent years refusing to acknowledge. "You blindsided us," he said quietly. "No," I replied. "I revealed what you ignored." The lawyer cleared his throat. "Legally," he said, choosing each word carefully, "she acted within her rights. These are internal project documents. The contract terms are binding. Nothing here violates confidentiality." Rachel's voice rose. "So she just gets to walk away after ruining everything?" I closed the portfolio. "I didn't ruin anything," I said. "I stopped absorbing the cost." Dad pressed his hands flat against the table, knuckles pale. "We need you for the Halbrook account," he said. "We can't deliver what Rachel promised. She didn't understand the requirements." The sentence slipped out before he could catch it. Rachel turned toward him, stunned. "You're blaming me?" He looked at her like someone staring at the foundation of a building that had just cracked, realizing too late they'd never bothered to inspect it. I stood. "This isn't my problem anymore," I said. "I've accepted another position." Rachel let out a short, brittle laugh. Who would hire you after this? The lawyer closed the folder with an unsteady hand. Anyone who values competence, he said quietly. For a moment, no one breathed. I picked up my portfolio. Dad stepped forward like he might reach for my arm, then stopped halfway, his hand dropping back to his side. We can still fix this, he said softly. You don't have to leave. I met his eyes, finally level, finally clear. I already left, I said. I walked out of the conference room, past Rachel's stunned silence, past the lawyer's careful gaze, past my father's fading attempt at control. I didn't look back. The elevator door slid shut with a muted hum, cutting off the view of the only world I'd ever been told I belonged to. And just like that, the system I'd been holding together for years began to wobble without me lifting a finger. Outside, the air felt different, lighter, as if the weight I'd carried for so long had finally realized it no longer had a host. The city noise blurred into a distant hum. My footsteps sounded steady on the pavement. At home, the light through the windows softened the edges of everything it touched. I set the portfolio on the table again, not with finality this time, but with a quiet sense of completion. This space hadn't taken anything from me. It didn't demand proof, didn't assign roles, didn't ask me to make myself smaller. I fed Milo, my dog, and he trotted across the hardwood, nails tapping lightly, a small, ordinary sound that grounded me more than any title ever had. I poured a glass of water and held it with both hands, the way I used to cradle coffee during early meetings. The gesture surprised me, a habit carried from a life I no longer owed my energy to. That night, I didn't check my emails, I didn't rehearse old conversations, I didn't anticipate who would call next or what they might say. The quiet wasn't heavy, it was clean. The next morning, I dressed without rushing, choosing clothes based on comfort instead of image. On the drive to my meeting with the new company, the Salem skyline looked less like something I was escaping and more like something I was finally seeing as my own. Their office was smaller, brighter, filled with the easy sound of people talking without tiptoeing around unspoken tensions. When the hiring manager introduced me to the team, no one compared me to anyone else. No one measured my presence against a sibling. They just shook my hand and smiled, like that was enough. Later, standing near a window overlooking a street I'd driven down 100 times, I thought of the acceptance letter that had once been buried under engagement party napkins. The late nights spent fixing impossible timelines because someone else had overpromised. The countless times I'd stayed silent because silence was expected of me. Then I thought of the empty desk, the cleared walls, the resignation letter, the portfolio set on the table without drama. Each action had been small, simple, mine. Leaving didn't feel like a loss. It felt like an opening I had carved, with nothing more than facts, restraint, and a refusal to keep rescuing people who treated my competence like an endless obligation. For the first time in years, the quiet around me didn't feel like an eraser. It felt like freedom. In the end, I learned something simple. Silence isn't always surrender. Sometimes it's a doorway, a threshold where you decide what enters your life and what never will again. Walking away didn't break me. It brought me back to myself. If you've ever stood in a room where your worth was treated like background noise, let this be your reminder. Your life doesn't need their permission to change. Thank you for listening. If you want more stories like this, stay close. There's more to tell.